Alright, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from Street Scores, and I have so much more Emmanuel Forbes content coming out endlessly for at least the next 2 weeks, but we're going to be talking about them all the way through training camp, all the way through preseason, regular season, and I am working on a film session where, again, like I've already told y'all, there's going to be like a 5 to 10 minute one that's released to everybody, but channel members only are going to get like a 30 minutes or an hour long one, so go become a channel member if you haven't yet already. But today we're focused on the day 2 Washington Commanders 2023 NFL draft, biggest remaining needs and best players available that can fill those needs. Are we looking at quarterback? Are we looking at offensive line? Are we looking at tight end? Are we looking at linebacker? We have picks 47 and 97 right now. But are there any potential trades that we can make to potentially trade up to get an elite player that's for some reason fell out of the first round, or are we potentially looking to trade back to acquire more second, third, or fourth round picks or later round picks? And then after that, we're also going to dive into who I feel like the Commanders want the most, just based off of some things that we noticed from yesterday, some random clips from behind the scenes, and it may give clues to what positions we're probably looking at the most. But before we dive into all of that, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell next to the subscription button so you get notification immediately and every time we release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you go check out all of the Emmanuel Forbes content I've already put out. I'm coming out with more, and of course make sure you pull up all of the draft coverage. I started live streaming yesterday at 6:30 p.m. The draft started at 8 p.m. and we went all the way through, streaming through the first round, and I'm gonna do the same thing today starting at 6 p.m. even though the draft starts at 7 p.m. and we're gonna live stream through the entire second and third rounds. I analyze every pick for every team. It's not just a Commander stream, so make sure you pull up for that. And I will be live streaming Saturday as well for at the very least round 4 and 5, I believe. And without further ado, let's get it. Alright, so let's take a look at some of the best players available. We're going to dive through quite a bit of names and why I would take them. First of all, of course, some people argue that Will Levis is the best player remaining, the quarterback out of Kentucky. I do not want him. I'm good. I've never been a Will Levis fan. I never understood it, and I can see why out of all of the top quarterbacks, he's the one that's still lingering around there. But speaking of quarterbacks, Hendon Hooker, the Commanders have shown strong interest in him, man. I mean, left and right, private visits, talked to him at the combine and everything, and even took him to private dinner. And I know I've said it several times, but the last time we took somebody to a private dinner, we ended up hiring them as our assistant head coach and offensive coordinator in Eric Bieniemy. We don't typically take players to dinner. Hendon Hooker was one of only 2 potential draft prospects that we took to dinner this entire offseason, at least from what I've seen from reports and things like that. That's not a usual thing. We bring in 30 guys for visits, but to take guys to dinner is really interesting. I'm not even sure if we did that for anybody last year or maybe even the year before that. That's a very unique experience and shows that they really believe in somebody. They're trying to get to know them every way possible. And I didn't even know taking players to dinner was even allowed outside of the top 30 visits. I feel like that's a way to finesse the top 30 visits. If you already used up your 30 for different players, why not take a 31st player to dinner? I don't exactly know how that works. Maybe that dinner was included in the private visit. Maybe you're allowed to have it last over 24 hours and do multiple things with the person. So I guess that's how that works. But again, it's Hendon Hooker and MJ Anderson, who we could potentially get maybe in like the 6th or 7th round as an edge rusher. That's a discussion for another day, probably tomorrow when we preview the day 3 potential picks that we can make, including the drafted free agents. But for now, Hendon Hooker, man, the only guy that is even possibly a second round pick today, second or third round pick, is the only prospect that the Commanders took to dinner. And again, there's already been reports even outside of that they're heavily interested in Hendon Hooker, specifically Eric Bieniemy. So if he's there at our 47th pick, there's a strong chance we may end up taking him. Kevin Sheehan literally said that the Commanders love Hendon Hooker a few days ago, and that if he's there at 47, we're taking him. And there were recent reports that said that Hendon Hooker may end up going in the top 20 in the first round, and there was almost like no chance he would be there at 47, starting to look a little bit more realistic. So if Hendon Hooker and Will Levis are both there at 47, do not be surprised if we took Hendon Hooker. Don't be surprised if we pass on both of them, but if we were to take any of the two, it would be Hendon Hooker. But moving on from quarterback, because I doubt that's going to be the selection. I don't care how much reported interest we have in Hendon Hooker. I personally wouldn't make that move there. Now, if he's there in the 3rd round for some crazy reason, then yeah, go ahead. But I feel like we still have too big of a need at offensive line and tight end to be thinking about quarterback right now, when Sam Howell could potentially be your guy. And then you do kind of have Jacoby Brissett to step in this year if you need him to. But I'm definitely more in the boat that we need to find some developmental guy to learn behind Sam Howell, just in case. Jacoby Brissett should not be involved in any of the equations that we're putting together, especially as far as looking towards the future of this team. So as of right now, if we're looking into 2024, Jacoby Brissett is not part of the picture. So we do need somebody other than Sam Howell on this roster. And Jake Fromm is clearly not it. I prefer Steven Montez over Jake Fromm. So we do need to find somebody later in the draft. I think ideally Dorian Thompson-Robinson in like the 5th round, but again, that's another topic for tomorrow before the draft starts. Hopefully, maybe if I get time to do that, because I'll start streaming at like 11:30 a.m. So I'll have to wake up early to get that going. But we could probably at least talk about it in the live stream that I'm gonna do, instead of maybe a video before like I'm doing today. But then you also have a lot of really good tight ends, man. You have Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame, who some people thought would be the #1 tight end to go, but I could have told you a long time ago that it was gonna be Dalton Kincaid. If there were only one tight end taken in the 1st round, it would have been him. I think, to me, he's going to be a better version of Zach Ertz. I already knew that we more than likely wouldn't target him because we have a lot of receiving potential on this team. If anything, we need better blockers. So Michael Mayer made a little bit more sense. My boy Darnell Washington, we're going to get to him soon. But Dalton Kincaid, I think he's going to be an amazing player. I can easily see him being a better Mike Gesicki, and I can see somebody potentially even turning him into like a Travis Kelce almost like a player. But, I mean, at the end of the day, if people thought he would truly be Travis Kelce, and there was a great chance of that, he would have gone top 5 in this draft. But you see the talent there, you see the potential. Don't want to dive into that too much because he's already on another team, but there's a reason why all of these tight ends are still available, and he went in the 1st round. Just wanted to make that clear. So you have Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame, you have Luke Musgrave out of Oregon State, you have my boy Darnell Washington out of Georgia, of course. You have Sam Laporta out of Iowa, who you can argue has one of the highest ceilings out of all of the tight ends in this class. I think him and Darnell Washington, you can easily argue. Then you have Tucker Kraft out of South Dakota State, Britton Strange out of Penn State, and then we start to dive more into like 4th round, 5th round options. So 47th pick wise, I mean, at this point, if Darnell Washington is in any somewhat range, like within 5 to 8 picks, me personally, I'm trading up to get him. My whole dream case scenario coming into this draft was getting both of the Darnells, Darnell right at tackle and Darnell Washington at tight end. I'm telling y'all, man, I just don't see what other people don't see, man. I mean, the floor in itself with the blocking, and he can only get better at it with better technique. And then, even though he's inconsistent with his hands and he's not a good route runner, at the end of the day, first of all, tight ends are schemed open by their offensive coordinators. This is maybe only 3 to 5 tight ends in the entire NFL that's getting open on their own. And then as far as the hands go, you see flashes of one-handed, ridiculous contested catches occasionally. He just drops the easy ones sometimes, and you can coach that out of him. And at the end of the day, to have a 3rd tackle on the field, I'm not even expecting him to catch that much anyway. But just imagine how open Darnell Washington will be leaking out at the last second after starting the snap as a blocker and then leaking out underneath Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, Antonio Gibson out there taking all of the attention of the defense. Darnell Washington will literally be open for 7-8 yard catches all the time. You wouldn't be able to have enough resources to worry about him and all of those other guys around him. So I'm stating my case. I'm banging on the table for Darnell Washington. But if we ended up with like a Michael Mayer, Lucas Musgrave, or a Sam Laporta, I wouldn't be mad. But Darnell Washington is my favorite option, at the very least, left in this draft at tight end position. At the tight end position. Maybe overall my favorite player available. I'm not gonna lie. Even ignoring me being a Georgia Bulldog fan, I just feel like he's such a safe prospect, at the very least as a blocker. And right now, man, we got to figure some things out on this offensive line, because we haven't upgraded it much. It's an upgrade slightly over what we had last year, but it hasn't been a huge one. And remember, a lot of the problems that we were having with our tight ends last year is that we would ask them to block more than they should have because our offensive line just wasn't really good at blocking, and we needed the extra help. And so if you're looking for extra help, and we still haven't exactly found that game-changing offensive lineman in this draft yet, and maybe we never will, you never know. Hopefully we do at some point, maybe in the 2nd or 3rd round, pick 47 to 97. But if you wanted to have a tight end that could help as a blocker, Darnell Washington is arguably, the day that he's drafted, your best hope for that. literally a third tackle on the field. He even prides himself on it. He prefers to block and dominate the guy in front of him more than even go out there for a catch. I mean, he's almost the same size as half the edge rushers in the NFL. He's bigger than probably half of them. I just feel like he fixes so many needs for us that it just makes too much sense, man. And then tackle-wise, I really wanted to go tackle in the first round because there was just so much cornerback talent. You could have gotten somebody really good in the second round as well, even though I do really like this Emmanuel Forbes pick. It's growing on me by the minute. But at the same time, man, this tackle class, at this point, I'm not a big fan of anybody left. You have Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse. I hope I pronounced that right. I mean, again, I'm the type of person that watches a lot of tape, but I just never take the time to really go listen to how people's names are pronounced. But the Matthew guy out of Syracuse, and you can argue he's the best tackle available. You also have Cody Mauch out of North Dakota State. You have DeJuan Jones, who a lot of people like. That was their starting right tackle. Some people even see him potentially moving to left tackle. You have Tyler Steen, Blake Freeland. Some people like Wanya Morris. I like Anton Harrison a lot. I'm not a big fan of Wanya Morris, but you never know. And then you start to dive into the later round prospects, day 3 guys like my boy Warren McClendon out of Georgia and stuff like that. Jalen Duncan out of Maryland. Again, at this point, tackle, I'm good unless we're going to wait till like 4th round or later. I wouldn't take any of these guys day 2, me personally, even though I know a lot of people are really high on DeJuan Jones, Cody Mauch, and Matthew Bergeron, however you pronounce it. So I'm looking towards guard. For me, it's like tight end or guard easily right now, or interior offensive lineman in general. So if you want to say people that are more guard than center, you have Steve Avila out of TCU, who I thought may go in the first round. Osiris Torrance out of Florida. I thought he was pretty safe to go in the first round. I thought after Peter Skoronski went, Osiris Torrance was the next interior offensive lineman to go. So he would arguably be a steal at 47. Steve Avila, you can also argue maybe a steal at 47. ESPN has Steve Avila higher than Osiris Torrance. I'm a little bit higher on Osiris Torrance, but either way, I'd be pretty happy. And then after that, there's nobody really left that I would take necessarily in the second round, but some people are really high on Curtis McClendon. Some people are high on Andrew Voorhees. Some people are high on Antonio Mafi, and there's clear interest there from the Commanders on a lot of these guys. Steve Avila, Osiris Torrance, Antonio Mafi. There's clear interest from the Commanders there throughout this entire offseason and draft process. So we'll see. You have Anthony Bradford out of LSU. City So, however you pronounce it. The Commanders have shown interest in him. But honestly, out of all of the interior offensive linemen left, I feel like the centers are the better prospects. Joe Tippmann and John Michael Schmitz, I thought those guys were fairly safe first round picks as well. But the way that the draft played out, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that they ended up still being here in the second round. But Joe Tippmann and John Michael Schmitz, either of those guys at 47, you killed it. And it makes a lot of sense because, I mean, if you draft one of those guys, they'll probably have their quickest route to being a starter at left guard. Because right now, Ron Rivera said it's between Chris Paul and Sadiq Charles, which isn't a lot of competition. I loved what I saw from Chris Paul in that final game of the season against the Cowboys. But at the end of the day, he was a 7th round pick. And for some reason, they didn't believe in him to start at left guard the entire season, so that last game of the season, and he balled out. But I still got to see more to be able to trust the fact that he can start at left guard for us. For the only 2 guys in the race to be those 2, Sadiq Charles, who can't stay healthy, and Chris Paul, the 7th round pick that's only started 1 game in his NFL career so far, I'm nervous. And the fact that Andrew Norwell wasn't mentioned when that makes it obvious that he's more than likely going to end up getting cut to save us some cap space, so we can even pay these rookies, because as of right now, we don't have the cap space to even pay our rookie class right now. We literally can't pay Emmanuel Forbes right now, so we're gonna have to figure some things out. But either way, Joe Tippmann and John Michael Schmitz make a lot of sense because I can argue easily that they're more center than guard. You can even argue maybe even pure center, but I would let them compete for the starting left guard spot immediately, and then eventually they could be our franchise center moving forward for our, like, as a franchise center, because Chase Roulier, top 5 center in the NFL, but only plays half the season. Give us half of that paycheck back, please. If you don't, man, it's the door. I ain't gonna lie. Even though, just ultimately, glass half full, I hope Chase Roulier can work out. He can stay healthy from here on out and be our franchise center, but nobody's believing in that. I don't even think the Commanders believe in that at this point. We've seen enough. Tyler Larson, not even as good as Chase Roulier, but gets hurt just as much. And then Nick Gates, between the 3, is coming off of the most catastrophic injury. But he was able to remain pretty healthy for the Giants last year. So if anything, even though he's coming from the most catastrophic injury, you can argue he's the least injury prone out of the 3. but still Nick Gates is here basically as a Wes Schweitzer type of person, a pure backup that if you need him to start somewhere to fill in for an injury, he could do that, and you could do that with confidence. But you don't want to go into the season assuming Nick Gates is your starter at guard or center. And he's basically Wes Schweitzer, but he's more center. Wes Schweitzer was more guard. But either way, you draft Joe Tippmann or John Michael Schmitz, maybe they start at left guard for you immediately, because you could argue best player available. If you're trying to put together the best offensive line you can possible, if Chase Roullier is healthy, he's your starting center. But John Michael Schmitz and Joe Tippmann is so talented that they could transition to guard and potentially start there even over Chris Paul and Sadiq Charles. If you're trying to put together your best potential, at least your most talented offensive line possible, if you were to draft Joe Tippmann or John Michael Schmitz, it would be Charles Leno left tackle, Joe Tippmann or John Michael Schmitz left guard, Chase Roullier center, Samuel Cosmi right guard, and Andrew Wiley right tackle. It makes too much sense. But ultimately, over time, you hope Chris Paul becomes good enough to start a left guard for you, and one of those two, Joe Tippmann or John Michael Schmitz, is ready to start at center because Chase Roullier got hurt or something like that. You never know. But you can also argue, just plain and simple, when we pick at 47, one of those guys is arguably best player available in this entire draft. So we'll see how that goes. And then, of course, man, we gotta take a look at linebacker, man. It's getting a little wicked out there, and Trenton Simpson is still available. You know my boy Dayon Henley, I love him. He's still available. You have Drew Sanders, who some people have as their favorite linebacker in the class, still available. 6'4", 235 pounds, could be the perfect fit for what we need, where we have Jamin Davis and Cody Barton, they're the sideline guys, but they're small, more will linebacker type of guys. Drew Sanders could come in and be your true Mike linebacker that's stopping the run and all of that, and he has crazy speed. I mean, at 235 pounds, 6'4", running a 4.59, 4.58, that's pretty good, man. I ain't gonna lie. With a crazy 20-yard split, a crazy 10-yard split as well. Hey, man, I'm cool with it. A 37 vert, so he's explosive. He's pretty agile. Change of direction is really good for a guy his size at 235 pounds. So I can see the argument for that. But, of course, Dayon Henley is my favorite linebacker, arguably in this entire class. He's just my guy. And then a lot of people feel like Trenton Simpson is the best linebacker coming into this class. So you can see the argument for either one. And if we ended up taking one of those guys at 47 or 97, I'm not complaining because they're all potentially really good players. Just the problem with Dayon Henley, another kind of smaller guy. Same thing with Trenton Simpson, but at the same time, Dayon Henley shows more Mike linebacker traits than Jamin Davis and Cody Barton, at least from what I've seen coming out of college. Now, Cody Barton, as the season went on for the Seahawks, getting late into the 2022 NFL season, he started to show he could be a better run stopper, more like a Mike linebacker, but I got to see it long term. And Jamin Davis is improving as a run stopper, but I also got to see that long term. Whereas Dayon Henley is, again, another undersized linebacker, which would give us 4 at the top of our depth chart if we draft him, including Khaleke Hudson, who's technically a linebacker safety hybrid. We don't have a true Mike on the roster. Out of those 4, Dayon Henley is my leading candidate to be our starting Mike linebacker day one. Even though, again, he's undersized like the rest, that's my guy, man. I think he could arguably be the best linebacker in this class when it's all said and done, when we look back years from now. And again, Drew Sanders makes the most sense size-wise and fit-wise, but I just think Dayon Henley is so great. And even though he's undersized, it doesn't look like it on tape. I mean, that would pretty much be the theme of the draft. If we take Dayon Henley after taking Emmanuel Forbes, our whole motto is, I don't care what size you are. If you play big on tape, we're just going to assume that it doesn't matter at the NFL level. Your lack of size, none of that. If you play big on tape, especially Emmanuel Forbes in the SEC, I mean, granted, he is 166, but on tape, you would never tell. If you never looked at his measurables and just only watched his tape, you would assume he was somewhere in the 180s. But then he measured at 166. Dayon Henley is the same thing. If you watch him on tape, you're like, man, this guy plays like he's 240, but he's really like 225, which isn't that small, but it's still fairly undersized. And again, we draft Dayon Henley. He's our starter Mike linebacker day one, in my opinion. You also have DeMarvion Overshown, who we've shown strong interest in, 6'3", 229, so probably leaning towards more of that Mike linebacker fit that we're potentially looking for, maybe. But, I mean, he's still only 4 pounds heavier than Dayon Henley, but the Commanders have shown a lot of interest in him as well, bringing him in for a visit and everything. So that's a guy that we could potentially target maybe in like the 3rd round if he's there. We'll see. It's a lot of interesting prospects out there, but I'm really only talking about the top ones or the guys that I feel like are my favorites at this point. And then cornerback. I mean, do we want to double back and take another corner? Because Joey Porter's out there. My dog Tyreek Stevenson, who was a Georgia Bulldog, went to Miami. There are a lot of transfers that I'm mad at, or at the very least I don't respect. But Tyreek Stevenson, I understand why he went to Miami, so I still root for him. I hope he does well, but I don't see him as necessarily a fit for us. If anything, we need to take like a slot corner. So that's why Julius Brents doesn't make much sense. Keely Ringo doesn't make much sense, but I love all of those prospects. You have Cam Smith still out there, DJ Turner. It's really interesting how much talent is still out there in the cornerback group. You have Corey Trice, who's a freak athlete. You have Jacorian Bennett, another Maryland corner as well. I mean, there's so much cornerback talent. That's why I thought going offensive line in the first round made the most sense, because there wasn't going to be really good tackle talent outside of the first round, but there's a lot of really good cornerback talent out of the first round, like I already told you. But again, if we're going to go with another corner, especially this early in the draft, second or third round, it's got to be one of those guys that ESPN has as a safety, but I project him to basically be a pure starting slot corner. You can argue maybe Buffalo nickel, and that is Brian Branch at Alabama, man. You can argue when we pick at 47, if he's there, he's best player available. But I think we're definitely leaning towards offensive lineman. We're going to talk about why a little later. But Brian Branch there at 47, to me, him and Darnell Washington are the best players available in this whole draft class at that point, if they're both there. And I would be ecstatic for us to pick between one of those two. I prefer Darnell Washington, but I'd be really happy with Brian Branch, because you can easily argue he's the best pure slot corner in this draft, but he also has the size to where you can play him at Buffalo nickel. I mean, you could honestly say comp him to like a less athletic Minkah Fitzpatrick. Very smart, can do everything you need him to do on the field. Tested terribly at the combine, made up for it a little bit at the pro day. But again, it's one of those things where if you just look at the tape, forget the whole combine and testing process and measurables, that would be the theme of this draft for us if we took Emmanuel Forbes in the first round and Brian Branch in the second. We're just going purely off of tape. How did you play against SEC competition? And we're just going straight off the tape. How well did you look on Saturdays? And those would be elite players. Emmanuel Forbes, if we're just going based off the tape, was easily one of the best corners in this draft, arguably the best. And Brian Branch is the best safety, slot corner, Buffalo nickel. My Georgia Bulldogs call him star position, but the Commanders call him Buffalo nickel. And then, I mean, ESPN has Jair Brown from Penn State, Sidney Brown from Illinois. But honestly, my second favorite slot corner / safety available in this draft is Jartavius Quan Martin, who the Commanders have shown strong interest in. Wouldn't be surprised if they took him 47th overall. Again, I feel like offensive line is a bigger need at this point, especially with what the Eagles are doing. We're going to get to that. But if we're talking about best player available and we're picking at 47, Jartavius Quan Martin, who Chris Sims has as his best safety in this entire NFL draft. I mean, and I see him as potentially just as good of a slot corner, if not better. I can see us taking him there, and I would be ecstatic. But if somehow we take offensive linemen, say, with our 47th pick, and Jartavius Quan Martin is there with our third round pick, we killed the draft. I mean, that's a huge steal, getting Jartavius Quan Martin in the slot there. We'll see what Percy Butler ends up doing, like what happens with Percy Butler if we take Jartavius Quan Martin or Brian Branch. But either way, I don't care. Let them compete, because you get Brian Branch and Jartavius Martin added to what we already have in the secondary, and you can argue it's elite. And then just to do our due diligence, there are some edge rushers out there, and with this Chase Young and Montez Sweat situation, don't be surprised. So you have Keon White from Georgia Tech, you have Adebawore from Northwestern, who the Commanders have shown interest in. Derek Hall from Auburn. He was supposed to be way better than he ended up being. That's just crazy looking back at his going from recruiting to where he's at now entering the draft is crazy. Byron Young from Tennessee, Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame, the Thule guy, the tweener from USC. I mean, there's some options out there if we wanted to do that, but I'm pretty sure we will wait till way later, like third round, fourth round, maybe fifth, to address that situation. Running back, you never know. They said that they are interested in some guys, and Kendre Miller is out there. Roshan Johnson, man, if he didn't play behind Bijan Robinson and got more shine, he would be way higher on people's draft boards. You have Tajay Spears, who I'm a big fan of. You have Zach Evans. I mean, I know I'm skipping a lot of names on the ESPN's big board, but I'm just trying to point out some of the most notable names. Of course, my boy Kenny McIntosh out of Georgia. Ignore the pro day, ignore the combine, whatever. That man is different. I don't care. Zach Evans was a 5-star and was the number one recruit of his recruiting cycle for a long time, until at the very end when they came out with the final ones, Bijan Robinson surpassed them. Both the two top running backs of their recruiting cycle coming out of high school. Zach Evans still has all of the talent in the world. somebody just has to take the time to coach it up to him. I mean, he originally was at Georgia. He did something off the field that was so bad that even Kirby Smart was like, you gotta go. And then he ended up at like TCU. Then he transferred to Ole Miss. And I haven't heard anything off the field wise concerns for him lately since the incident when he was a Georgia commit. Well, it looked like he was like a signee or something. He was like really close. But either way, wait, Antonio Brown is going to the Baltimore Ravens. Is that true? Wait, what? But either way, Zach Evans has a lot of talent, and there was a reason that him and Bijan Robinson were neck and neck for the #1 running back recruits coming out of high school at their time. The talent is still there. It's just going to take somebody to get it out of them. And then receiver, I mean, I don't really feel like it's worth going into that. Fullback, definitely not worth it. Defensive tackle, definitely not worth it. Long snapper, punter, kicker, punt returner, whatever. We do need a returner, I arguably would say, but as of right now, I'm not really looking at that right now. And then maybe if you want to go smaller edge rusher, now that Shaka Toney is suspended, maybe you can go BJ Ojulari from LSU. You know, you never know, but that's just me talking. And so, yeah, man, moving on, I'm telling you, the Commanders are definitely looking at offensive line. There was a leak. Well, not necessarily a leak, but the Commanders posted it themselves, but you kind of had to notice a couple of things. First of all, when it was 2 picks away from us, we picked 16th. When it was at 14, they were like, okay, so Broderick Jones went. We got 3 names, 2 picks in front of us. Broderick Jones was one of them, and then it was Will McDonald. And I'm assuming Will McDonald was not one of them. So I'm curious who the other 2 names were. And we already know, obviously, by now, the Emmanuel Forbes was the other name. I'm curious who the third name was. But clearly, with the interest in Broderick Jones that we have shown from the Commander side, that we are interested in taking a tackle early, or at the very least offensive line early. And also, if you look at what the Commanders posted, they have a big board up of what the Giants, Cowboys, and Eagles are doing, division rivals, really the entire NFC on their board. But you can see like right next to the Commanders and what their draft plans are on their little dry erase board in the back, you have Cowboys, Giants, and Eagles right next to the Commanders. So they're clearly paying attention to what the other division rivals are doing. And if you haven't noticed, the Cowboys, I feel like it was a reach, but got a pretty freak athlete in a defensive tackle. And then the Eagles, I mean, as a Georgia Bulldog fan, I am crying inside. Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, and Nolan Smith. You know how hard it is going to be for me to root against those guys? Again, I already said it in my previous video, breaking down the Emmanuel Forbes pick and everything. But as a Commanders fan, Georgia Bulldog fan, and all of the other teams I like that I'm really passionate about, I haven't seen a team that I truly, truly care about win any championships in my lifetime. Because again, I was born after the Commanders were doing all of that winning. In my lifetime, other than the Georgia Bulldogs winning these 2 back-to-back championships, and we're about to go for a third, I can go ahead and stamp that now. So I'm so attached to these players, the guys that were the faces of it, Nakobe Dean, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter, the leaders, the best players and stuff like that. And so to have to detach from that and try to root against those guys just because they're on the Eagles, man, I am torn inside. But most notably, you see all of those guys that we named defensive players. Nakobe Dean, even as a blitzer, we got to watch out. And so far in this draft, we have done nothing to improve this offensive line. We did slightly in free agency, so we don't have to necessarily panic and take offensive line and reach on a guy, but we need to do something. So I'm definitely leaning towards interior offensive line at this point because there's no tackles left that's worthy of going with the 47th overall pick. If we don't go Brian Branch, Quan Martin, or Darnell Wright, who are arguably my 3 favorite picks left, I'm definitely looking at Joe Tippmann, John Michael Schmitz, or one of those guys at interior offensive lineman, 47th overall as well, because we got to counter what the Eagles are doing, let alone what the Giants and Cowboys are doing. The Giants already have arguably one of the best defensive tackle tandems in the NFL. I would say ours is better. I say Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne are the best, but the Giants aren't far behind. The Cowboys, again, just drafted an athletic freak, and they still got Micah Parsons and all of that talent on their defensive line. And then the Eagles just only got better. I mean, Fletcher Cox, he's old, but he's still there. Jalen Carter, the best player in the draft, in my opinion. The next Aaron Donald level player with Jordan Davis, who's disruptive. He can only play about 30% of the snaps a game, but when he comes in, he's dominant. Then Nolan Smith off the edge with Hassan Reddick. Come on now. Like, we got to counter that, right? The Eagles have thrown a series of punches, and we got to come back. Now, interestingly enough, to counter Hassan Reddick, Andrew Wiley pretty much erased him out of the Super Bowl. He had no effect on the Super Bowl. So we kind of did a good job with that, but we still got to figure out Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, Fletcher Cox, and all of those guys. And if you look at it, I mean, Chase Roulier, can he stay healthy? Right now, our projected starting left guard until we draft somebody is Chris Paul, a 7th round pick who's only started one game in his NFL career so far. And then Samuel Cosmi, who a lot of people don't have a lot of confidence in moving from right tackle to right guard. That's who we have up against Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, and all of these freaks, Fletcher Cox, Nolan Smith. It's scary, man. I'm telling y'all. I don't think people have noticed how worried we need to be and why the Commanders may even panic and take a guard sooner than we probably should. But I feel like at 47, with the guys that are available, center, guard, whatever, you would be perfectly in your right to take potentially Steve Avila, Osiris Torrance, especially. I like Osiris Torrance more than Steve Avila. Joe Tippmann, John Michael Schmitz. Either of those guys at 47 make too much sense, and more than likely one of those guys is going to be available because we're only like 14, 15 picks away starting in the 2nd round from our pick. So somebody should be there. And again, I'm really hoping, just based on best player available wise, even though it may not be as big of a need as interior offensive line, I'm hoping Darnell Wright, Brian Branch, Quan Martin are there as well, and Dayon Henley at linebacker or whatever. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please leave a like on this video if you liked it, if you learned anything. As always, man, I appreciate all the support, man. Shouts out to all of my sponsors, especially my Pro Bowl sponsors whose name you see scrolling on the screen right now. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video, man. How you feel the Commanders need to attack 47 and 97. Again, if I'm looking at it right now, maybe best case scenario, outside of us getting Darnell Washington or Brian Branch, because I think they'll honestly be gone before we pick 47. And again, ignoring quarterback because I don't think it's worth it at this point. Best case scenario, again, ignoring my favorite players available, are probably interior offensive lineman 47, and then linebacker or slot corner if like Quan Martin makes it there at 97. I doubt it though. That's probably like the best thing we could do. Let me know how you feel about it. I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm out.